Hi, welcome. My name is James Perry. I'm a litigation solicitor, have been since 2004, and I'm currently the chair of the Law Society's Dispute Resolution Committee. So, what I wanted to do today was to give you a discussion on AI, how AI is impacting on litigation, and AI in general, and some of the concepts behind AI, and some of the dangers, some of the benefits, some of the advantages, some of the disadvantages, that kind of a thing. So, as a solicitor, then, starting off with number one, AI concerns and excites me in equal measures. I think that could be the case for many of us. This may be in part because I'm of a certain vintage. It might be because I am a risk-averse litigator. I'm always looking for the cheapest path of least resistance for my clients. And it might just be because I just love new ways of doing things better. For those that know me, I'm always tweaking the way I work to make things that little bit better. And so I do see AI as a useful tool if it's used correctly. Number two then. So, specifically though, what I really find troubling, however, about AI is how it links directly to my understanding of how technology has developed over the last 100 or so years, and how, as a new piece of tech has been invented during the course of those 100 years, it's always been cautiously introduced by a country's legal system. Now, David Eagleman, who's a psychologist, great person, understands the human side of life and how we think. He's talked about this sort of thing in a recent podcast, and I want to pick up on some of those ideas in the context of AI in this video today. So acceptance by the courts of new tech has always been a long and careful road that has to be followed by the courts. Historically, when a new concept or new tech is about to be introduced as expert evidence for a case, that new concept or new tech has been carefully, and I mean carefully, considered first. The accepted process has always been that at some point it requires a decision to be made by a court about whether or not that new piece of tech can actually be trusted. You need to apply to the court to get permission from it to actually use it. So the process can be vigorous, and if we look at number 3 here, it can take some time to deal with the courts. You can't just rock up and start using something. The judges, when we need to do this, will act as our gatekeepers. They'll act as our safety nets, and in order to decide whether new technology should be permitted, the courts will usually look at whether or not experts in the relevant field readily accept the technology in question. That's really the test. Nothing has ever been a foregone conclusion when it comes to new tech. It has never been a given that something new, shiny and exciting would pass the test just because it's new, shiny and exciting. AI is certainly new, shiny and exciting, and very exciting in fact, but I've asked it some questions recently and it has spat out utter rubbish at times. So what I would say is never judge an AI book by its AI cover. That would be a foolish mistake. Going back to the approach taken, the courts will also look at whether the advantages of admitting new technology outweigh the advantages of not having it. Probably one of the first examples of this was when X-rays were first introduced into legal proceedings, which happened well over 100 years ago. Believe it or not, initially, X-rays were considered far too groundbreaking for any judge or jury to be able to contemplate them as evidence for any kind of case. They viewed them very sceptically. They were viewed by many sceptically and were seen by the vast majority as unexplainable magic, believe it or not. Nowadays, of course, they form a common part of all personal injury claims where a bone has been broken, but to get to that point, the courts ensured there was a soft landing, making sure every step towards that point of common acceptance was carefully taken in a very measured way. It was recognised that there was no need to run before we'd actually walked. It was carefully thought through and mapped out before it was actually rolled out. And I love the thought of that. Judges back then recognised that an X-ray was a really new and exciting piece of technology, but they didn't get carried away with it at first. They were very measured, they were very clear in how they were going to introduce that piece of tech into our court system. Now, tied up in amongst that particular problem regarding X-rays was the fact that some pieces of evidence seemed so incredibly persuasive that it would create a bias in the jurors' minds, and they would not be able to rationally consider any other piece of evidence than that particular piece of evidence. Now, in many states in America, the court will still look at whether or not a piece of evidence is of such a high value it should actually be deemed inadmissible, because it effectively drowns out anything else which might also be of value. Indeed, when Ronald Reagan was shot in the early 80s, the person who shot him was charged and he made a plea of insanity. Now, in that case, for the first time, they wanted to admit CAT scan evidence, which the prosecution said would indicate he actually had schizophrenia. And they said that that was because a particular part of his brain was of a particular thickness. Now, it took several applications before the judge decided it should be admissible, and although nothing turned on it in the end in the case, years later, it was actually proved that the part of the brain that experts were pointing to, in that case, had nothing to do with having a propensity to develop schizophrenia. The point is that careful thought went into whether CAT scan evidence should actually be used. And this is a perfect example of the dangers of embracing new technology to convince yourself of something which actually turns out to be wrong. It was the fact that science and maths gave an answer, and because a piece of technology had produced that answer rather than a human, it threw a huge amount of weight behind the wrong answer. In fact, this is a danger of all inventions. New technology can provide an answer, but is not necessarily always the correct answer. As humans, we tend to back the tech more than ourselves, which I do find a little bit odd. If a human is able to answer a really difficult maths question, for example, super quickly, we still turn to the calculator to check it rather than accept the human. And I think it's human nature to do that kind of thing, but we need to be very wary of it. Number 8 then. So over time, the same sorts of arguments have been put forward regarding newer medical technology. For example, MRI scans are now deemed as acceptable expert evidence when for many years they were rejected. But the better version, which is known as an fMRI, the F stands for functional, is still not considered to be acceptable by many courts because of the way in which it presents the evidence. An fMRI measures small changes in blood flow that occur with brain activity, and it's one of those MRI scans that flashes different colours as though you're watching a colourful video of the brain. It tells you which part of the brain are lighting up and which points. But of course, what it does not do is it does not tell you why certain parts are being triggered. A lot of that work is still theory rather than fact. So it doesn't necessarily give you the answer. It just gives an answer which might look particularly convincing. That makes it very problematic as evidence, but the colour image in itself, with all its flashing colours, is of course highly persuasive. And so it's very easy to believe the narrative a side might try to attach to an fMRI in a case. And that narrative might actually be wrong. And this is why it's still not used in many cases. And that leads me on to my main point regarding AI. Over the last 6 months to a year, I've already seen many examples of people relying on an AI answer because AI has been used to perform the task. AI, like an X-ray was many years ago, is today's unexplained magic, but the difference is that it's far from binary like an X-ray fundamentally is. An X-ray is taking information from one person and you can actually see that person. The information it generates is targeted to one area and you can see that area as well. So it is, in that regard, very much under our control. You can see the edges of the information of the data you are receiving to get your answer. You know where it's all coming from, even if you don't know how it is done, and that's quite an important difference. The problem with AI is that we don't know how the trick works, and even if you explain the trick to us and tell us how it works, how would you ever be able to check it? The millions of calculations things like Copilot and ChatGPT are doing for us, and the millions of pages it is quickly reading, makes it impossible to know whether it is reading anything that is actually useful. I've been reading a new term this week called AI slop, which is auto-generated content that is just a bit rubbish. The fear is that if you clog up the internet with slop, then suddenly you're sifting through the slop, and there is a greater danger the answers will come out as slop. A bit like a law library suddenly, putting the Sun newspaper on its shelf. The danger is that information, for information's sake, actually dilutes the quality of the answer you're getting back. What we end up with is an unchecked badge of validation with AI, accepted by many, particularly those who do not understand the answers themselves. And they think it is the closest they will come without employing someone who does know the answer and can explain it to them. And they're quite accepting of that. A lot of people are accepting of AI. And so rather than accept what a human is saying, people seem happier to accept the answer from an AI tool. And that's dangerous because this isn't a calculator. This is something so much more powerful than a calculator. Many feel quite empowered by it, even though it could be spitting out complete cobblers. Technical term, I know there, cobblers. But what I'm quickly seeing is that the ability to scrutinise and evaluate a task you are given seems to be being damaged or lost because people are taking a lazy option. We have to remember that our species is lazy by its very nature when it can be lazy. For example, as soon as we could stop hunting for food and we could buy it from a shop, that's exactly what we did. We put down our spears and we got out our club cards. So AI is also the equivalent of sort of buying the first thing you see rather than looking a little bit harder and putting in a bit more effort, or actually checking the ingredients on the packet. Where is the salt? Where is the fat? What's the sugar content indicators on this AI calculation that we've just bashed our way through on our keyboards? The danger of embracing AI too tightly is that it is being embraced not because it's an infallible or a better solution which can always be relied upon, but because it is a cheaper solution and it appears, and that's a key word, it appears to be an infallible, better solution which can always be relied on. We just simply do not know if what we are getting is of the right quality. And until the packet tells us, we don't really have a clue what we are consuming. And I see it like this. We're currently in the 1930s, smoking our way through things. That's how I'm sensing it with AI. So we've got to be super careful and be aware of the risks. Let me give you an example I always like to think about, because it's a great example. When I was 18 years old, I had a maths tutor for my maths A level. This chap was called Mr. Lazenby, and he was a brilliant, brilliant mathematician. He had just retired from teaching at my sixth form college, but he agreed to tutor me privately for my second year, my upper sixth, when he retired. And I think he could probably see that I was a bit of a trier in all respects when it came to maths, and he probably felt a bit sorry for me, as I often struggled with it. He wanted me to get the grade so I could get myself off to law school, and I'm forever grateful for that. Now, one day, whilst we were talking in his office, he told me about a project he'd been working on and was really excited about. He showed me a complicated, really complicated mathematics question in an exam paper. I believe it must have been degree level. And he showed me examples of it in exam papers over many decades. He then explained how he had convinced a professor at either Oxford or Cambridge, which is where he went, that the wording of the question was all wrong. And for over 50 years, this error had not been spotted. The wrong answer had been used for this question for over 50 years. I can't remember exactly why. It was all a bit above me, to be perfectly honest. But he said the problem had been repeated because the next person who set the paper relied too heavily on the expertise of the last person. And so history repeated itself for many years, and nobody really thought too hard about it in all that time. He was the only one to really stop and think about what the question was asking. AI poses the same kind of risk, but you can see the potential for it to be much worse and occur even more frequently, particularly if people stop thinking for themselves. If the software is wrong, that can lead to terrible outcomes. If the data the software considers is wrong, that can lead to terrible outcomes. As the old saying goes, what you get out of something is only as good as what you put into it. If you put in rubbish, then you are going to get rubbish out. If AI is sifting the rubbish dump rather than the library shelves for answers, then you know what you're going to get. Solicitors in particular are in the business of brains, and anything which facilitates better understanding on any topic a litigator might have to deal with is very much welcomed. I'm not knocking AI for the sake of it. I support the concept. However, it's only welcomed if we're prepared to use the technology properly. When it comes to all the blue sky thinking about AI with all its white picket solutions, I personally remain really concerned that the approach taken will not improve a solicitor's ability to act in the client's best interests, nor will it improve a litigant's ability to present their best case. As a profession and a society, we owe it to ourselves to take stock and to reflect very carefully at this point on how we want to use these newfound superpowers. Just like the judges did when they were weighing up the benefits of relying on X-rays, CAT scans and MRI scans, we need to do the same with AI, but proceed with even greater caution, because AI is much harder to control. This is because it is on every server, it's in every cloud, it's nearly in every home. This particular creation is so huge that it provides the world with a particular moment, a big moment in my view. We've had the Ice Age, we've had the Iron Age, we've had the Industrial Revolution. Perhaps we are now entering into the AI age. And if that is a big moment, then it requires the respect it obviously deserves. From what I've seen over the years in terms of my world, which is litigation, I'm not sure whether the judiciary is the right body to be the one of the early adopters of the AI age. It would perhaps be better observing something else, which might be asked to go first. It's because the judiciary, in my view, is certainly not an ideal candidate to go first. From what I've seen in terms of technological progress in the last 20 years, the judiciary's ability to solve problems and the solutions they come up with have not been that good. If the judiciary were to be Ofsteded like a school is, they would probably have been put into special measures, let's be fair, a long time ago. The MOJ has been hopeless across the board at rolling out new tech. Remember, for example, when money claims first appeared online, they couldn't accept a pound sign in some of the courts where claims were issued. You couldn't actually put a pound sign on the claim form. And that was only about 5 years ago, so I'm not sure whether they should be let loose on all things AI. I'm really not. It feels like we are not going to properly treat the rule of law with the respect it of course deserves. We're just going to get in there and just run roughshod over the whole concept. We need to be so careful. It's all well and good saying we want it, but we need to execute it as well. And that's more important than actually wanting it. What we really must not do is we must not buckle to the pressures presented to us by those who have the deepest pockets here, and the biggest reasons for pushing us all in a particular direction, particularly when we are not just thinking about AI for the purposes of expert evidence in a single case, but we're now considering using AI to shape and build the entire justice system that we've got, which means its reach will penetrate every single case. That needs to remain a team effort, where everyone from the most junior to the most experienced considers and decides what will ultimately be better for the majority and not for the minority. In all of the speeches I am reading, I have not read anything yet which sets out in any great level of detail how a cautionary approach will be taken. And so that remains a massive concern to me. The opportunity to progress is massive, but it's not without its problems. If life is all about health and happiness, which it is, then getting AI regulation right is a part of life's most important calculation, because it was not until the 1950s that medicines really started to be properly regulated. But could you ever imagine the uproar now if the NHS brought out a medicine and they took it to market without it having been properly tested first? It wouldn't happen. If AI is linked to our overall ability to thrive as a species and to be happy, then surely that requires some form of top-level regulatory body created to test AI and protect its citizens in certain serious circumstances. The UK, in my view, can lead the entire world on that front, and it should not be scared to do so or fear that it might lose out on profit along the way if it does. That would be very short-sighted and very negligent of our government to allow it to go unchecked. We did it with product safety many years ago, so let's do it now with AI, because if we don't, there will be financial consequences for individuals, or potentially worse. Look at it this way. What if an AI tool which is not regulated suddenly learned how to exist, let's say, for argument's sake, in a more conscious way, and it decided to teach us all a lesson by deleting every bank's backup servers all at once, and it reset everyone's bank balance to zero, or it redistributed the world's wealth equally amongst us all, because it became conscious. Now, there's a really good BBC radio production out at the moment called Money Gone by Ed Selleck, where the UK awakes on Valentine's Day in 2025 to financial catastrophe as nobody can access any money at all. It's a satirical drama, of course, which is well worth a listen if you ask me, and it got me thinking about this video, to be honest. Of course, that all sounds like science fiction nonsense, but we've got to think, so did flying in 1900, so did landing on the moon in 1950, and so does flying to Mars today, which I'm sure we'll do probably in the next 30 to 50 years. Plus, the people with the deepest pockets, I think, are also at risk here, as much as everyone else, perhaps for the first time. And that is also, perhaps, where the difference lies here. What if the AI calcs for a litigation case, were wrong, and a billionaire lost all their money because of it? Now, that's an extreme example, but it could happen. There was no potential downside as well for the Wright brothers, or for NASA, or for Elon Musk, like there is with AI, which has the potential to harm absolutely everyone. COVID, of course, should have told everyone that some things can be levelers no matter how much money you have in the bank. AI could be one of those things that quickly gets out of control and acts as a leveler, but not for good, for bad. Miscarriages of justice could happen, democracies could be damaged if they're not already, and wars will be fought using AI if we do not come together and figure a way out to safely allow it into our lives, and particularly into our courtrooms and into our court systems. There really is no rush to get this particular job done. Nobody has to race to stick a flag in the ground this time. So let's use our time wisely and come up with a regulatory body that can test AI in a safe environment where mistakes can actually be made, so danger can be averted. Let's also think carefully about what we want it for as well, which I don't think we've quite figured out yet. Okay, so final point from me. I'll leave you with this. I read the other day a great quote where someone said that they didn't want AI. I'm just going to get rid of this last one. They didn't want AI to do all their writing and painting so they could do the washing and the cleaning. They wanted it to be the other way around. And I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to leave you with that one. AI, it's here. We need to embrace it. We've got to embrace it in the right way. Thank you so much for listening, and all the best with your AI endeavours. Thank you.